Hello there. Sat Sri Akal ji.
Sat Sri Akal ji.
How are you?
I'm very well, you?
Yes, good, thank you.
Guru Nanak Dev Ji de Gurupurab te ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧਾਈਆਂ.
Yes, likewise. Yes, thank you. I hope you had a good celebration.
Yes, thank you. And also the good news from Punjab as well, that Mr. Modi has backed down from the farmers repeal the laws, or he's saying he will. So that's very good news for the farmers of India.
Okay. Yes, I didn't know that. Yes, so that is very good news.
Yes.
I think that is a brilliant news, honestly, been rejoicing in that.
Yes. Sat Sri Akal ji, everyone. Singh ji, Gurch, Singh ji,
Morning.
Narvinder. How are you all?
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Good.
Excellent. Excellent. Congratulations to everyone on Gurpurab.
Thank you all from me. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, excellent. Arvinder Singh ji, can you raise your hand as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So that just leaves Gurch, I can't see your hand raised, and Sukhchandan Gaur, I can't see yours raised either at the moment. So, yeah, so welcome to this second Learn to Lead conference. This time we're focusing on symbology and leadership. And let's just first of all start with brief introductions. My name is Jasveer, and I am an educator based in Birmingham in the UK. So the top person I see on my screen is Virpal Singh ji. Could you please introduce yourself?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Virpal Singh, and I am chairman of the Sikh Center New Zealand. Thank you.
Okay, great. Arvinder?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Arvinder, as it says on the screen. I'm an educator. I was an assistant head, and then I taught teachers how to teach at a university on their postgraduate courses. And now with my wife and our special needs daughter, we run a charity called Rainbow Schools, in which we're looking to build a school, an inclusive school in Punjab shortly.
Okay, brilliant. You see, we have two Arvinders. And,
yes, Arvinder, yes.
Yes, we have two Arvinders. And I actually meant the other one first, otherwise I would have said Arvinder Singh. So,
I'm sorry.
How about if we do it how about if we do it that way? That if I'm calling on Arvinder Lali, I say Arvinder, and if I am calling on you, I say Arvinder Singh. Is that okay?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, great. Arvinder?
Yeah, sure. My name is Arvinder Lali. I'm a degree apprentice at Scouts, and I also study at Queen Mary's University. So that's me.
Okay, great. And Gurch?
Morning, everyone. I'm Gurt Trandawa. I'm a Professor of Diversity and Public Health at the University of Bedfordshire.
Thank you. And Sukhchandan Kaurji?
And I am Sukhchandan Kaur. I am with so many educators. I'm a learner here. By profession, I'm a social worker, also legally qualified. And most importantly, I'm a grandmother and a mother and a Sikh.
Yeah, that's one of your top priorities, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I've had conversations with some of you individually about symbology and leadership, and some of the symbols that we have discussed, and as you all know, there could be hundreds of symbols that we could have discussed, but some of the ones that we talked about more often were the titles of Gaur and Singh, the symbolic use of Gaur and Singh, the Ekankar, Bandi Shor, the symbolism behind the story of Bandi Shor, Seva, Langar, Guruji's horses, the falcons that symbolize his leadership, Gurmukhi, the script, the Khanda, and the Nishan Sahib. And associated with these symbols, of course, there's like numerous values, but the ones that we talked about most often were about kinship, oneness, inclusion, activism, innovation, humanitarianism, heritage, and the list could go on. And similarly with emotions, we know that empathy is an important part of leadership, and altruism, compassion, courage, confidence, creativity, confidence, courage. The list could go on. But in today's discussion, we will focus on a few of these symbols. We'll focus on a few of these, the values. And I've chosen, I could have chosen lots of different ones, but I've focused on empathy, innovation, and prestige, because for me, there are the heart elements of leadership. Without empathy, we can find it very difficult to gain trust of people if we don't empathize with them. Innovation is important from the mind level, and prestige. For some people, prestige may not sit naturally with soul, but later on through the discussion, I'll explain why I place prestige in the soul element. But first of all, before we go into depth with this, let's start with kinship. Some of these symbols, the symbolism of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, he kind of evokes the humanitarian values of empathy and compassion for all faiths, all religions, and the oneness symbolized by Gomkar, and the story, as we said earlier, about Bandi Chhod. So let me start by asking you to please raise your hands to let me know how do you think how do you think that we balance this contrast between kinship and benevolence, like humanitarianism for a wider community, not simply our own, not simply apne, like not simply because we relate to them because they are from the same, they share the same values as us, whether those values are to do with our ethnicity or our professions or whatever. So Arvinder Singh ji, you have your hand raised. I'll start with you.
I'm sorry, I forgot to put it down earlier. It's been up since then.
In that case,
Okay.
I'll start with Virpal Singh ji. Could I start with you, Virpal Singh ji? And then please lower your hand when you so that I know who to call on next. Thank you. Go ahead.
I think the answer to your question for me personally lies in the parallel between a family and its interactions with the wider society. That as a family, our first priority is to take care of the family, and then on the basis of that, we interact with the rest of the wider society. So when we apply that to our own community, then our first priority is to first look after our community, and then in our interactions with the wider society, we look after everybody else. And that also helps in the sense that if our house is safe, then we have that state of mind where we can start thinking about taking care of the world. But if our house isn't safe, then we can think a lot about saving the world, but there will always be this worry at the back of the mind that my house needs saving. Thank you.
Okay, yes. So it's like starting from, it's like when we're on a plane, they say we have to put our own mask on before tending to our children, right? So it's that similar concept. It's like we have to preserve our own self-interest and then the interest of our family, and then the circle gets bigger and bigger. Sukhchandan Kaurji, go ahead.
As I said, really, my profession allows me to interact with a very wide audience because I work with very vulnerable and disadvantaged families, children, and some of that I have experienced in my own life. So the interaction between two, it allows me to see people who have, for example, when the children are being abused in a family, rather than seeing an abuser, I see people. I get to know really what's happened in their life, what has brought them to the place where they are. and dealing with humility, dealing with compassion, trying to understand their circumstances, their life history, as it's really how they can change the course of life. And it's really that the compassion for the people, the empathy with those people, and realization, my children could have been there one day, I could have been there. And I think that for me, our values in Sikhism, the symbology, really allows me to mix my personal and professional life, which makes a very large part of my life. And therefore, it allows me to reach that balance where you can have a belief, you can have value, but you can actually also practice that and remain true to yourself. So
with the children that you're looking after, you don't differentiate between whether they're similar to you or different to you. Children are children, and so it's that benevolence regardless of their ethnicity, right?
Absolutely. With Sikhism, with God is one, Ikonkar, and the equality that our Sikhs have brought in, which is with Guru Gobind Singh Ji, when he served his jail, when Guru Nanak Dev Ji did the Sacha Sada, all those values are very much enshrined in my day-to-day work. And at the beginning of my when I started my profession, I hadn't realized that, but as I've really walked through my life, having been in my profession for 35 years, it really gives me that opportunity to be oneself. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I can cross any races, religion, and people from. One day I could be speaking to somebody from Iraq who've been through the impact of war on them, their family life, and on their parenting. Other day I could be talking to somebody, I do a very deep dive talking to somebody who's been in Punjab or have, suffered different kinds of issues or experienced different kinds of issues. Or I could be talking to somebody from Somalia, where women had to be mutilated in order to comply with this honorism, that to honor their, what is the word really, that to keep their honor, they had to be stitched up and cut and mutilated in order to do that. So it just brings me opportunities to see people as people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks very much. Gorch?
Really interesting contributions. I suppose I just wanted to pick up on what Virpal Singh was commenting on. I guess in public health, we're always stuck with this adage that prevention is better than cure. And we work on the fact that, our own lifestyles are influenced by a range of factors. So some of them are individual. So one's age, gender, genetic factors, they are down to us as individuals. But the challenge of public health is we need to recognize that people don't live as individuals. We live within families, we live within peer networks, social networks. So there are a range of lifestyle factors that influence how we can look after our own mental health and physical well-being. And obviously, within the Sikh community, there are some good things about social capital and, langar, although I would say it needs to be a healthy langar. And there are some, great value from that whole ability to practice one's religion. But there are also wider networks that we have to think about. So we have to think about things like, what's the housing experience for everybody? It's not similar. Just because you're from Sikh community doesn't mean you've all got, a decent roof over your head and your house is warm. And that's true of all faiths. And then we have to think about people's ability to access healthcare and whether that's good quality of healthcare. And then whether people have, clean water, whether they have a job or not. So their living and working conditions impact upon this, and access, to a high quality education. So I'm very interested to hear more about this Rainbow School. And then also about the ability to access a healthy diet, because that's again influenced by people's economic spending power as well. So I think there's a whole range of factors that we need to think of, which we use in public health all the time, because that, if you like, that forces us to think about all communities, because we can't, if you like, segment the population out. We need to ensure that we're dealing with all of these health and social conditions. And the only thing I'd say about values is I spent 12 years as the chairman in the NHS, and what I would say is one of the values that I think we should really hold on dear to is resilience, because I think it doesn't matter if you're a new leader, amateur leader, or a professional leader, needing resilience and being able to practice resilience and being able to role model resilience, I think is really important. And I think that shines out of Sikhi when I think about the whole concept of Chardi Kala. That's how I personally interpret Chardi Kala, that's I get up in the morning, I go to sleep in the night, and it's telling me we all need to be resilient.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Gurch. I'm going to pose this question now for Arvinder Lalli in a minute. So Arvinder Lalli, I just wanted to ask you about this concept of kinship. As Gurch said, you know, there's networks within networks. And so when we talk about kinship, we can think of kinship in terms of our family, our cousins, our relatives, and we can think of kinship in terms of our, you know, everyone who's called Gordon Singh is part of our own community. So, but we can also think of kinship in terms of, you know, the reason I call on you, Arvinder Lalli, is because you're a part of the Scouts group. And that also is a kind of kinship, you know, people who have shared interests. And then Arvinder Singh, the Rainbow Schools, that's a kind of kinship when we're working for a charitable cause and we want to help, you know, a group of vulnerable people, like Sukhchandan Kaur helps children. So there's kinship of, you know, we can call it affiliations, you know, but an affiliation is a type of kinship. And so what do you think, Arvinder Lalli, about this whole concept of kinship? Who's part of the in-group and who's part of the other? How do you balance the two?
I think as a whole, it includes everybody, regardless of, like, you know, the concept of Ekon encompasses every single person. In terms of coming back to the question about, you know, in Sikhi, I think a great sort of saying is like charity begins at home first. Like, for example, the Sikhs, we don't really have like a homeland to call us per se. We have Punjab, but that's not really within our sort of autonomy of control. But yet Sikhs do such amazing work outside. So for example, Khalsa, they've done so much work, especially in India during the COVID crisis. But I think, come back to the question, for me, kinship, for the inner circle for us would probably be our community, such as like our Gurdwara, our the Sangat, the youth as well. And outside would be, you know, people in need, and just generally as a whole, the whole of humanity.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned Khalsa, because that is often given as an example of where Sikhs have become more and more visible internationally, because with Khalsa, it's not simply looking after apne, it's also about looking after anyone who's vulnerable all over the world, you know, regardless of what people's religions are. And so it's being benevolent and being all-encompassing. Okay, Arvinder Singh ji, go ahead, please. How do you balance this kinship and the other?
I always go back to Ek Onkar and personalize that. And what does that mean for me? Because a lot can be said about what it means. It's one God, but what does that really mean? How do you personify that? How do you use that in your own personal life? And for me personally, is the connection with the higher being in me, and to be connected with that higher being, whether you want to call it God, spirituality, whatever name you want to give it. There is a feeling, something inside me that I feel when I connect to it always tells me the right thing to do, always uplifts me. It always brings about the best in me. So that's what Ekyonkar means for me. And when I do connect with that, and that's the whole beauty of life for me, is when I do connect with that, and it's not as frequent as I would like it to be connected to, then life just has a different meaning altogether. Then my own family, although culturally and socially, psychologically always does come first, and I do have to put my house in order first. But when I do connect, that expands out. Then it's not just my own family, it's not just my Sikhi community, then it does go out into the whole world, into the whole of humanity. And I think that aspect of Ekyonkar in Sikhi has been borne out through the terrible COVID crisis that we've had over the last 18 months. And the number of gurdwaras, especially, that have reached out with langar to vulnerable people all throughout the world, not just Khalsa Aid. Khalsa Aid has been a spearhead as a, it's been visual with their name, and they've gone out, which is wonderful. But there are thousands of gurdwaras all over the world who've come out to help the community because of that simple Ekyonkar, that there's humanity, there's a need, and we as Sikhs have been taught by Guru Nanak to go out there and help these people because they're no different from us. So that empathy, Ekyonkar, is actually so deeply enshrined, and it comes from the personal connection within first, and then that allows you to go out into the community as a wider community, as the whole world.
Okay, thank you. And Birbal Singh ji?
I just wanted to clarify that what I mean when I say that we should start from home. It is more like that if the atom is unstable, then any molecule it forms or any further higher structures it forms, they will be unstable as long as the atom itself is unstable. So if we don't have, let's say a Sikh doesn't have a roof over his or her head, then we can't expect them to start planning for the homeless around them. And in the same sense that when we compare with other religions, they have this concept of us and them, but we don't. We always work on the concept of Sarbatta Pala. But in order to do Sarbatta Pala, we have to have a starting point. And my argument is that we should always be starting from the smallest unit. And in this case, that would be the family, the community, and then further the larger circles. And just to take another example that I came across in my own work from the public health itself, that it's only after nearly 30 years that the government pushed the Sikh community of New Zealand to start working on the prevailing occurrence of diabetes and heart disease. We don't have any data, the government doesn't have any data on it, but they have data on other communities. So we, in order to serve the world, if we are ignoring our own community, then we are creating a bigger problem, which will have an impact in our ability to serve the world itself. So that's what I just want to make clear. Thank you.
That's a very, very important point, Birbal Singh ji, because, well, for all sorts of reasons, but I will perhaps kind of go into those later. But let me share my screen for the second question I want to ask. I'll go back to the point you made later on. So this thing about egalitarianism and prestige. So my question about this is that, I mean, in Sikhi, we are, the philosophical basis is egalitarianism in terms, well, that's the way I interpret it anyway, this whole concept of oneness and that we are all part of that same web of life. And the langar symbolizes this egalitarianism where we all sit on the floor as equals and share food and use the same utensils equally. And at the same time, there is this prestige. You know, these are examples of how our gurus demonstrated leadership, not through dominance, but through prestige. they never set out to conquer and dominate others, but there was this kind of, this is why I put Prestige in the soul category, because it was very much to do with their presence and values based. It was as though the leadership came from the soul. So how do we as a community, how do we balance this egalitarianism and at the same time being influential leaders and being able to lead through prestige? If you could just raise your hand so that I know who to call on first. Okay, Gorch, go ahead, please. I think, Gorch, you're muted. Yeah, your microphone is still muted, Gorch.
I do apologize. I'm just thinking of, some tangible examples. So I think there's a debate to be had. I had a fantastic mentor when I was chairing the NHS, and they taught me that, the best leaders, one, you need to hire the best teams around you who are actually far brighter than I ever will be. And also, you need to sometimes lead from the front, as you've described. You sometimes need to lead side by side, and sometimes you need to lead from behind. For me, I think there's a debate to be had about whether you call it prestige or whether you call it gravitas. Because for me, I think gravitas is about, if you have gravitas, you are comfortable in those different leadership styles. Whereas to me, prestige suggests that you need to be visible at the front, and I don't. So what I learned was, probably won't surprise many of the wise people around this table, is if you want to make progress in healthcare in the UK, given we're a publicly funded system, I probably needed to give most of my prestige to the politicians, because that's the way you get things done. And I kind of didn't need to be in any photograph, to be honest. And I just needed the politicians and the patients. And if I was really lucky, I could get some healthcare staff in the photograph as well. So I think for me, there's something about the debate between prestige and gravitas and how we understand those terms. But also it's about having those flexible leadership styles that enable us to give confidence to the teams around us. Because what you want to do is you want to create future leaders. I don't want to create followers.
The way I look at prestige is, just to use a metaphor, is the way a grandmother leads in a family. The grandmother has gravitas. The grandmother is the person that everyone goes to because she loves everyone in the family equally, usually, you see. So for me, there is no difference between prestige and gravitas. It's about the influential kind of leadership. So and I think the prestige, it does entail leading from the front when necessary, leading from the leading from behind when necessary, etc. It's about being able to adapt according to the situation in the same way that a grandmother does. A grandmother doesn't lead in a crisis. She doesn't lead in the same way that she does when it's a celebration, for example. There's different types of leadership. Sometimes you step back and you just enjoy, and sometimes you take the lead because there is no time for anyone to think about things. So Arvinder Singh ji, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I think if you interchanging prestige and gravitas, then I agree with you. But Gurch, I really like the fact that you use the word gravitas. Prestige can sometimes lead to people thinking of ego as well. And gravitas does not. For me, I think the gravitas word is more about having that integrity and confidence in yourself to know that you're doing the right thing. And in leadership over the years, I found that the vast majority of people are not leaders, they're followers. And if you have an idea and you want to push for action towards that idea, it will take leadership skills. It will take, what word you used earlier, Gurch, was resilience. it will take all those things for you to be able to pull people together towards what everybody thinks should be done, but no one's going to start the process. No one's going to start voicing it. No one's going to start taking any action towards it. And what I've found over the years is that a lot of people love to talk about things, but very few really get out there and do anything about them. Because talk is cheap. And when you have to get out there and do something, you're putting your neck out. Nobody wants to put their neck out to do anything. So leaders are far and few between. And if I look in the Sikh community, there are very few leaders that I know of. I'm sure there's lots more, but that I know of that have absolute integrity in what they're doing, and their actions and their focus is more altruistic rather than ego-led. And with me personally, Ek Onkar and the whole of Sikhi is about that connect within, which allows gravitas, which allows integrity, which in fact nurtures resilience, because if you know you're doing the right thing, come what may, you have that tunnel vision about doing it, even though there's 1,000 voices out there telling you that's not possible. You know, there's going to be too many problems. This is not going to happen. But you have that inner belief, that inner support, which allows you to continue.
It's interesting, Arvinder Singh Ji, that you talk about most people are followers, and the question is, who is it that we're following? And I suppose that goes back to Nam Japo, Kirt Kamao, and Banshako, because if we are following wisdom, you know, if we are following the Gurbani, as it were, if that is who we're following, then our behavior will be quite different compared with if we're following you know, people who are themselves a little bit confused and maybe misled. Virpal Singh Ji, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with Gurch regarding a leader needs to lead from sometimes from front, sometimes side by side, and sometimes just sit back and let people do what they're supposed to. And also the point that Arvinder makes about a paucity of leaders in our community who have integrity and who we can really trust that they are looking after people's and communities' interests rather than self-interest. I think the story of Nawab Kapoor Singh is really relevant here, that what it signifies is that there was a stage in our community where a person who was tasked with cleaning after the horses was also capable of leading the community from the front when if he was called upon to do so. And that's wherein the prestige lies, that within our community, if the, let's say, higher position somebody holds, and if that person is seen doing langar seva or jodyan di seva, that person earns much more prestige that way within the community rather than acting arrogantly or showing off how he or she has more possessions or whatever compared with others in the community. So our definition of prestige, or the system through which a Sikh earns prestige within the community, might be completely different from what other communities see prestige as. So a person who might be a high achiever, but when they are doing a humblest of tasks in the Gurdwara, that is where they earn prestige within the community. And that's important to keep in focus when we are looking at leaders. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Virbal Singh ji. And now, Sukhchandan Kaur ji, I'm going to ask you a question now about prestige. And this is my question to you. I know that you are fully aware of the glass ceiling and how much it can hurt when we knock our heads against this, this brutal force of the glass ceiling. And we don't, sometimes it's very difficult for us, regardless of how competent we are, to rise above it, as it were, and to rise in the ranks in a hierarchy. Now, in situations like that, for me, prestige is sometimes the way around it. We might not have the status in an organization, but we can have the prestige, because the prestige is based on our skills, our competence, and our values. And I know that in your work, you're well known for being very honest, you're well known for being courageous, you're well known for being truthful. And for me, that is part of prestige. That's how I think of prestige, as a way to get through this glass ceiling when we cannot rise above the glass ceiling in a rank. So what are your thoughts on that, Sukhchandan Kaur ji?
Look, Jamal, what you have just said, you have really summed up for me very well in terms of having the integrity, being the honest leader, and being the honest professional out there. Part of my role is to advise the courts, having undertaken your investigations and coming to a conclusion, advising the courts what should happen to those children. Should those children be separated from their parents forever? Should they be turned back? Should they be going? Now, in that, if I do not have the integrity, for the past how many decades, I need to be consistent. I needed to be very clear, honest, and say, well, this is the evidence, this is my opinion, no matter how you interpret that is the view. So the integrity comes from that, and your fellow, the judges, the barrister people, they get to know your reputation, your prestige, but really that this, I have said this for a reason. Now, bringing that into leadership, where I did lead an organization, which was a professional association, naturally, I think I reached my glass ceiling in that. Those values that I brought with me, they're very different from very other people who were on. So it was quite difficult to kind of, when I work with the head and heart in harmony. I think by my fellow professionals, or I think that was seen as a weakness, that you're working with your heart. And I think my head and heart needs to be in harmony in order for me to be my true self out there. I cannot compromise those values just in order to rise above the ranks, because my values are important to me. They may not get me far in terms of the hierarchy, but with the people, where it matters, when I'm interacting with people that I am working with, the families I'm working with, that's where my true contribution comes alive.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps you sane, I suppose.
It certainly does, yes.
Okay, Arvinder Singh ji, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I just wanted to come back. Thank you, Sukhchandan ji. That was really heartfelt, and I totally agree with everything you said. Coming back to prestige and integrity, connecting within allows you to be connected to the truth and to do the right thing. And Sikhi de vich, the only thing I wanted to come back to say was Gani Karni, those people who say and do what they say. Yeah, they say what they mean, and they mean what they say, and they do what they mean as well, and do what they say. And there's very few people like that with that integrity. In my opinion, there's always something that comes in the way. The ego comes in the way. And I think Sukhchandan ji, when you get to a glass ceiling, maybe it becomes more of a boys and girls club at the top. Gurch might have other things to say about that, but in my experience, it becomes a closed shop or a closed boys group, girls group at the top. And sometimes it's also classist as well. And it's ingrained, just as racism is ingrained in every society. And I'm just saying British society. I think racism is actually ingrained in the Sikh society as a whole to a deep extent. We talk about paye in a very derogatory way when we go to Punjab, and we talk about, unfortunately, some Sikhs still believe in the caste system, and they believe one caste is superior to another. So we need to face up to these things if we are actually going to uphold the truth within us. And if we are going to just talk for talk's sake, which I'm not really interested in, I hope that this discussion gets us closer to being better people and better leaders. I think Gani Gadni is really important. And again, I would say that Sikhs, although I believe it's a wonderful, wonderful religion, Guru Nanak's teachings are fantastic, but we need to start putting those into practice rather than just reading them and singing them.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just quickly go to Arvinder Lally, and the question about prestige for you is, for some people, the bag is like a crown. It symbolizes, well, symbolically, it means so many things. And for somebody of your age, it can take, because I know you've only started wearing the bag recently, it can take a lot of courage to start, identifying with something that you haven't been brought up to identify with. So for you, how does wearing the bag, how does that relate to prestige for you?
Yeah, so for me, like when I see prestige, I kind of define it as more like a reputation in a way. But for me, one of the biggest reasons I got into Sikhi was our history and reading our history, the sacrifices of our ancestors. I'm currently reading about the Sikh Empire right now, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh and all those amazing generals. But for me, it's definitely the history has just spoken many words to me, and knowing that they went through so much, wearing it today in modern society, it means a lot. And also, you get a lot of respect as well. Like for example, last week when I went to uni, I was on the tube, and I met somebody, and they were like, "Oh, you're a Sikh," They were praising Sikhi, and it's just amazing just to have those random interactions. Whereas when I wasn't knowing at the start, they wouldn't know that I'm a Sikh and so on. But prestige for me, I understand it can be a bit of a clash. Sometimes it can be seen as a word of like egotism. But for on a personal level, it's about our Qawm, how much the caste of Bant has been through. And yeah, it's just a reminder to always keep your head up high and be intelligent. So.
Well, Arvinder, I want to give you a bit of feedback because for the sake of everyone else on the panel, I met Arvinder in London a couple of years back now, and it was because you wear the dastar that I stayed in touch with you, because you stood out. You sat next to me, and if you hadn't been wearing the dastar, I might not have taken an interest in you. But I did because of the dastar. And the reason I stayed in touch is because of the courage and the prestigious kind of leadership that you're developing in the Scouts community. So just that feedback for you. So well done. Thank you. And let me go on now to the next question. The third question is about innovation. And if we look at these symbols, for me, Gurmukhi is an excellent example of innovation. The Gurus created the Gurmukhi script for us, whereas they could easily have used Arabic, they could have used Sanskrit, they could have used, Farsi and Urdu, but no, we've got our own distinct script, a sign of innovation. And we've got so much heritage now over the last 550 years. There is so much heritage that we're proud of. So in our own leadership, how are we using both these concepts of continually innovating, pioneering new systems, new products, new services that work, and at the same time protecting our heritage and using that heritage as social and cultural capital. So could you please raise your hand so that I know who to call on first to comment about both innovation and heritage? Okay, Virbal Singh ji, go ahead.
The language and the script, it is one of the binding factors in defining the community, the Panth. And the language itself, the script, because of the Devanagari script or the Hindi script and the Arabic script, they had their own custodians who controlled who they were going to disseminate the knowledge to. So once Guru Nanak and Guru Angad Padshah, when they created this script, the Gurmukhi script, it kind of took the power away from those and gave it to the people. That the knowledge and the tools through which that knowledge was to be disseminated, it was controlled by people themselves. There was no kind of precondition or payment to be made through fealty or through following a particular religion in order to get the knowledge of that script. So this script was available to everybody, and it bound us as a community as well. And the language that it developed, not just the written and spoken language, but also the language of the culture itself, like Bhangra and other things that make up the Sikh culture. The language itself is important because the concepts, philosophical concepts, and the daily life concepts that the Sikh worldview created, they needed special terminology, which then became part of the Sikh living. So all these things are those innovations which the Gurus introduced with an eye on the future, which is still serving us, as you said, 550 years later. So it's really important. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Gorj, go ahead, please. There you go.
I guess I want to go back to what Arvinder Singh said, and I'm really mindful I don't want to offend anyone either. So I'm just going to say it, and then if I offend anyone, just forgive me. So I think there is a tension. So I think what we should be innovating and preserving in our heritage are Sikh values. My worry is, and this is just based on my experiences, and obviously my experiences are limited compared to this eminent group of people, is I feel that sometimes it's not the values that we're preserving, but it's some of the symbolic visual things. So let me take Gurdwaras, for example. You know, I think Gurdwaras are an amazing community space for Sikhs and local communities, and the langar, it's amazing when it's done based on values. It's more than food, isn't it? It's about sitting with people. Having a communal meal is really good for your mental health. That's the whole notion. And during COVID, you can do langar by collecting for your local hospital, helping your neighbors, or, you know, running pop-up vaccine clinics. I think that's wonderful. And I think, so our challenge is now using technology. We need to embrace technology because technology's, you know, here to stay. And that's the way we're going to innovate and, if you like, preserve our heritage. But when I go back to Gurdwaras, if I may, you know, I think our duty now is for Gurdwaras to be, if you like, eco-friendly Gurdwaras, because that's where Sikhi started from. You know, Guru Nanak about trees and climate change. So, you know, the nearest Gurdwara to me is in Luton, and they're actually putting on their brand new building, it's not finished yet, solar panels on the roof. We're going to have bicycle racks, because otherwise the obsession is, with all due respect, with having lots of car park space, and that's just encouraging more people to drive. Whereas, you know, I'm trying to sort of encourage them to, you know, I did some work years ago in the US on diabetes, as Virpal alluded to, with African Americans. And we started off in America something called the Health Promoting Church Scheme, where the church for African Americans became this hub of promoting health and well-being, encouraging healthy eating, encouraging exercise, walking to churches, educating kids about your history, the African American history. And I think, you know, there's no reason why we can't have health promoting Gurdwaras. The challenge we have is everybody wants to rock up in their, you know, cars. And I'm like, well, that's a tension for me. I'm not saying, if you can't walk, then by all means take a car. And the food needs to be more humble, in my opinion. But like I said, I don't want to offend anyone, because I know so many people do wonderful things in gurdwaras.
Yeah, well, Gurj, if I had it my way, I think we would offer fruit instead of, sweets with so much, like diabetics can't. I'm diabetic myself, and yet I find myself, partaking of the langar, whatever is offered, because it seems rude not to. And then I come back and do a sugar test, and it's really, really high. So, whereas if we'd had fruit instead, it might be fruit. I suppose most people can't really complain about fruit, although some fruits are more sweeter than others. But let me go on to Ravinder Singh Ji. Go ahead.
Innovation. 30 years ago, our local Gurdwara was being built, renovated from a building. And I suggested, being an educator, that they would have had a nursery, a creche, a nursery in every Gurdwara, especially our local Gurdwara. There are so many young, talented nursery nurses and nursery teachers that the Sikh community has. And what a wonderful way of bringing up your children in an environment of Sikhi, where along with learning about Wheels on the Bus and all the other Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star rhymes, they actually started to learn the Mool Mantar, what it meant, stories of Guru Nanak, the Sakhiyan. And if you can imagine, up and down the country, if every Gurdwara had a nursery full of 50 to 100 children, and where our community would be, in 10, 15, 20 years' time. That was introduced 30 years ago, but it fell on deaf ears. Unfortunately, when we look at innovation, I'm going to make a statement that might upset a lot of people. I think the Sikh community has failed itself in innovating from 200 years ago. I don't think there's been any innovation in the Gurdwaras other than a few which have, you have your gyms at the Gurdwara, some of them. You'll have the Punjabi classes, which children are taught by, in my experience, unprofessional way with unqualified Punjabi teachers. They are often usually women from the community who know Punjabi, who can read and write Punjabi themselves, or they were taught Punjabi in Punjab, and they're bringing it to the kids, but they don't have any teaching skills or any engagement skills with the children on how to teach in an innovative, in a modern way in which children are used to in their own schools. Gurj touched on langar. Langar is one of those things which we haven't moved on. We've actually moved on, I believe, in the wrong direction. We've made it into a 3-course meal with, dal and do sabjiyan and kheer and all the rest of it. I mean, let's bring it down to being humble again. Okay, there's a celebration of life maybe, and somebody wants to do a langar and somebody's celebrating something. Okay, fair enough. But let's bring it down to being humble and healthy as well. The amount of masale that are in the dals and sabjiyan and the jalebis going everywhere, it is actually an unhealthy space rather than us innovating and leading to be a healthier space. There's so many other things about innovation I could talk about within the community, but I think on the whole, we need leaders. I'm not in a space for myself to lead. I've pushed and pushed and pushed in my own local Gurdwara, but unfortunately, and again, this is going to upset a lot of people, the agenda in the Gurdwaras is like a shop. They are there to make money, to make the Gurdwara run, rather than serve the community. If they were there to serve the community, they would be doing so much more. Every week I've suggested, because I've got a disabled daughter, I have experience about working with the education system and the health system with disability and disabled children. I said I could run once a week, just give me one room for an hour for other parents, for me to be able to support them if they have any questions. Yeah, no response. I had to push and push and push to start Sikh camps for children in a local area so that we could actually use the Gurdwara's resources to do Sikh camps. So we ran Sikh camps for about 10 years. And then I suggested other younger people coming on board to lead to do that. But that fell by the wayside. Again, there was no leaders within the community to take over the goodwill of 10 years that we had built up.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's my kind. Sorry if I've offended anyone.
That's fine.
I
No,
apologize.
you haven't offended anyone. Well, you haven't offended me, but I'm just conscious of the time. So I'm going to let Sukhchandan Kaur and Arvinder Lalli and Virbal Singh just to have the final comments in the last 5 minutes. So go ahead, Sukhchandan Kaur ji.
Okay, I wanted to make 2 points, sorry. Once I really just want to respond to what Arvinder Singh ji have said. I totally agree with that Gurdwaras, I think in my view, I think they have not engaged the younger generation, our children. I think they have failed to engage them. I think Gurdwaras have become quite commercial places. And for the preachers who can actually disseminate that information, it has become a place where a source for visa, somebody to come from India and take the place, who simply does not have the skills or the knowledge to engage our younger people. I think if lucky, some young children might associate with Gurdwara with Prasad rather than the values. So I think, I don't know how to do it, but Arvinder Singh ji, if there's anything we can join forces at any point to try and push something really that our children need to be informed and that information needs to be disseminated to them so that we engage them in Sikhism. So that's my second point. The second point is about the innovation and heritage. And I want to thank you, first of all, creating this platform, creating this opportunity for people to come together and try to make sense of what our values are, what is our heritage is, and how do we use that in a leadership. And I truly hope and pray that your research will become very much part of our journal management speak, so that by doing that, you bring up the Sikh faith at a different level, coming from a different angle, but equally valid.
Thank you very much, Sukhchandan Kaur ji. And one of the aims of this research is to do what you have just alluded to, collaborations. You know, if you and Arvinder Singh ji collaborate on something together, that is what is expected, that is what is hoped for with this research. But let me go on to Arvinder Lalli now, please.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Arvinder Singh said. I feel like it's been more of a de-evolution of Gurdwara. If you look back in Guruji's times, Gurdwara were much more than what they are now. For example, we used to have horses, we used to have dorms, we used to have so much, and now a lot of that's been lost. And also, like, coming back to what the Gurdwara, like the function of the Gurdwara, like if it wasn't for such groups such as Besa Sikhi, really pushing Prachara for the younger audience, or the audience that might not know Punjabi, I personally wouldn't be into Sikhi first, because I wouldn't have known none of this like knowledge and stuff, because it's kind of like you go into a Gurdwara, you must take how long and just go. I don't know what the Granthi is saying because I don't know Punjabi, right? So in terms of innovation, I think the Sikh commerce really lacked in that, and I don't think we've made much progress. But I do, as a youth and seeing a lot more youth within my Sanghas, especially because I live in Southall, in the Hounslow area, it is encouraging to see. But I think we definitely need a lot more work on that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And final words then, Virbal Singh ji, just because of the time, if I could let you conclude with your final remarks.
Thank you. And what I want to do is just agree with the symptoms which have been identified about Gurdwaras and other practices within the community. But I disagree with the generalizations and the statements that for 200 years we haven't innovated. That comes, I think, more from lack of knowledge about what we did in 200 years. But I would love to continue these discussions outside this conference, and I'll take the first steps. So finally, thank you very much, Dr. Mal, for facilitating this coming together and sharing of views, and hopefully further collaborations as you suggested. will follow from this. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.
yes, Waheguru Ji
Waheguru.
Ka Khalsa. Thank you likewise, Virbal Singh Ji. And I do agree with you that there's so much that I have learned over the past year that I've been engaged in doing this conference. There's so much that I learned that I just didn't know. And it's through my ignorance that I also thought that we hadn't really contributed very much. But actually, the more I find out, it's like, I mean, even to the extent of like our contributions to World War I, our contribution to World War II, I had no idea that 1 in 6 of the army in World War I were Indians. I didn't know that, you know, so the more we learn about our own heritage, I think the more, you know, our eyes will open. And that's again, like one of the underlying purposes of this, this research is to raise awareness. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Sri Akal. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.
Assalamu alaikum.